Let me know when I can start. Huh? Okay.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Women all over the world, of all ages and from all walks of life, are, at least according to The Guardian, infallible. Yes, you heard me right. The fair sex can do no wrong. And if you criticize anything they do that is clearly immoral or even downright evil, your politics and your misogyny are showing. Back in April of this year, I critiqued an article in none other than The Cut that claimed Meghan Markle, Blake Lively, and yes, even Amber Heard are victims of misogyny. Well, it turns out that yet another article has reared its ugly head, this time in The Guardian, where one Steve Rose decided to follow in E.J. Dixon from The Cut's footsteps and continue to use every excuse under the sun to absolve women such as Blake Lively and Amber Heard of any and all wrongdoing. Except rather than solely crying misogyny, he's decided to point the mighty finger at politics. Yep, so original. Such creativity. Before I say anything further about this article, I do want to clarify that we do not do politics on this channel. We are apolitical here. I'm not even an American, and quite frankly, I don't identify with any of your politics. So even though the author of this article, Steve Rose, is trying his hardest and failing, in my opinion, to make this political, what I will be doing, hopefully successfully, fingers crossed, is demonstrating that calling out evil and wrongdoing that has been committed by women is actually an apolitical matter of morality. All right, so with that out of the way, let's actually sink our teeth into this piece. Steve starts off by basically summarizing the whole Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively case and describes the high level of interest surrounding it. But then he writes the following.
Many Hollywood figures and organizations have come out in support of Lively. But America's right wing has taken an inordinate interest in the case and is overwhelmingly siding with Baldoni. Fox News, for example, has run nearly 80 stories on the case on its website this year.
Okay, I mean, running 80 stories in 6 months or so on a very high profile case doesn't necessarily mean that a news organization is biased or is supporting one party over the other. And I'm no Fox News fan, but by that metric, a lot of left-leaning publications also would be obsessed in an unhealthy way and biased in their coverage. Let's have a look at a few. We've got Deadline, for instance, which has published at least 176 articles on the case as of the day of filming. And if you use affiliate partner to this channel, Ground News, you will clearly see that they are center-left. Next, we have People magazine with at least 120 articles on the case. And they, not that we needed Ground News to tell us this, are also left-leaning. The Cut has countless articles on the story, and you guessed it, they're left-leaning. And finally, The Guardian itself, which has so many search results that you get redirected to a Google search results page. And while The Guardian doesn't come up on Ground News for some reason unbeknownst to me, Wikipedia very helpfully tells us that they are center-left. So I'm not exactly clear as to what argument Steve Rose, I was about to call him Steve Rogers, Captain America, is trying to make against Fox News, but whatever it is, he's failing. Steve also mentions Joe Rogan as someone who's anti-Blake Lively, pro-Justin Baldoni. And again, clearly the insinuation is that he's some right-leaning political individual. If you ask him though, he doesn't identify as either and simply sees himself as an American. Something that I can actually get behind when it comes to politics. You know, it's this whole, people identify themselves too much according to their political leanings. I mean, you're just an individual, you're a human, you're a citizen of the country. But I digress. Not sure what you're trying to say here, Steve. A little bit of research before writing an article in The Guardian never hurt anyone. Or maybe it does hurt, which would explain why mainstream media never seem to do their research. By the way, if you're interested in getting a backstage pass into the world of media bias, then do consider subscribing to Ground News, signing up specifically for a Vantage plan, and you'll get 40% off if you use the link in the description box below. But after you finish watching this video, calm down now. Now, Steve does score at least 1 point in accuracy when he describes Candace Owens as a conservative or Republican. However, from what very little I've seen of her coverage of the Justin Baldoni-Blake Lively case, she comes across to me as someone who's simply reading court documents and arriving at her own conclusions. Same with Megyn Kelly, who also incidentally doesn't identify as a Republican per se. She describes herself as more of center-right, I think. But Steve accused her in his article of attempting, quote,
to tie the case to a broader right-wing grievance narrative.
Based on one speech that she gave earlier this year in February, where she accused the leftist media of trying to gaslight the American public. Now look, as I said, I'm no American, I don't live there, so I don't know how much of that is true. But I am a citizen of the world, and I do know that the media in general delights in gaslighting the public, left, right, and center, pun intended. So she's not exactly wrong. This isn't something far-fetched. That's why platforms like Ground News exist. And for what it's worth, I'm no Megyn Kelly fan either, but from what viral snippets I've watched of her covering the case or commenting on it, once again, I see in this instance a lawyer reading court documents and arriving at her own conclusions, the same way I do and the same way thousands do as well. Except we can't claim Brian Friedman as our lawyer, so if you want to argue bias on Megyn Kelly's side, I think that would have more credibility to it than anything political. You've all heard of the so-called manosphere, right? Andrew Tate's domain, you know, where extreme misogyny reigns supreme. I've actually ventured into it very briefly for research purposes for a video I made a couple of years ago. And let me tell you, you do not want to go anywhere near there. It's like the Shadowlands in Lion King. Just avoid it at all costs, Simba. But this is what Steve says.
In the same way, the manosphere has used male-oriented sports and fitness content as a gateway into far-right politics. Some are seeing this new celebrity focus as a way to draw women down the same path, and calling it the womanosphere.
I guess I'm in the Matrix then. I guess I've been sucked in to the womanosphere? Womanosphere? I don't know how to say it. Let's go with womanosphere, because womanosphere sounds really weird. But I've been sucked into it without my knowledge, apparently, because I too have issues with Blake Lively's story. Except, as far as I was concerned, I arrived at those conclusions entirely on my own. I don't tune into American politics. I don't live in the country, so I certainly don't get brainwashed by any of it. So how would you explain that, Steve? And it appears that Steve seemed to have hit a wall in this path himself, because halfway through the article, he abandons the whole right-wing argument entirely and pivots to the original, equally lazy, boring, and reductive argument of misogyny.
It's not just right-wing figures weighing in against Lively. Everyone seems to be at it. All this activity has whipped up a maelstrom of clickbait. Content creators, celebrity media, and prominent public figures feeding off each other's output, recycling and regurgitating the same low quality, primarily anti-woman information, all boosted by engagement-targeting social media algorithms. It's a perfect storm, says Doki. She calls it the misogyny slop ecosystem.
I don't know who this Doki is, by the way. Apparently, according to this article, she is a feminist YouTuber. But Doki goes on.
Probably misogyny slop has always existed, Doki says, citing figures such as Anita Hill or Monica Lewinsky, who were vilified in the pre-digital media age. But I feel like around the time of the Depp v. Heard trial, there was this real increase in social clout, almost in making fun of women who were alleging abuse.
All right, I don't doubt that there are people who are purely bandwagon hoppers without any real interest or passion in a particular story or case. And they do it purely for clout and money. Yeah. The Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and Justin and Blake Lively cases are not unique in that way. But to gaslight your readers, Steve, by clearly insinuating that, apart from a non-existent, in my opinion, political agenda to create some womanosphere, everyone who criticizes women for doing bad things is making fun of them is a pretty low blow. And so painfully reductive, it's actually embarrassing to even speak out loud. To simplify every horrid thing that Amber Heard did to Johnny Depp, which, need I remind you, Steve, included grievous bodily harm, is an insult not to just our intelligence and our integrity and morality, but to the entire concepts of justice and truth. Especially after Amber was found liable for defamation in a court of law, up to a strict legal standard of proof, and by an impartial jury, or where the jury also sucked into the womanosphere, influenced by evil people, right-wing operating monsters like Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly. That's what's mind-boggling here. We have the Steves and the Dokies of the world literally ignoring actual facts and evidence presented in a court of law, subject to the extremely strict rules of evidence. And instead, they choose to rely on false and misleading and inaccurate reports made by data analysts like Bot Sentinel and Information Tracer as quote-unquote proof of manufactured smear campaigns against these women online. I mean, geez, not only have I been sucked into the womanosphere without my knowledge and permission, apparently I've also been stripped of my humanity because I'm a bot. They ignore a finding made by an impartial jury and instead choose to cling to a disproven tale of a proven liar. You know, when you're found liable for defamation, one of the elements is that you have made a statement of fact that is not true and is not an opinion. So you lied. Amber Heard is a liar. And what does Steve do to present evidence in his own article to convince you otherwise? He links to biased media organizations like Tortoise, which I've never heard of before, that ran an entire podcast literally called Who Trolled Amber, with the theme being that all the hate directed at her was manufactured. Listen to this blurb on their own website. Millions of us watched the celebrity trial of the century, Depp versus Heard, in 2022. Amber Heard lost and Johnny Depp was vindicated. But what if Amber Heard was actually the victim of an organized trolling campaign? Yeah, because the jury were part of that organized trolling campaign, by the way, didn't you know? What if the online hate against her was manufactured? Again, the jury were in on that. Alexei Mostrous investigates what happened to Amber and who might have been responsible. It's a story about how our own thoughts and opinions can be molded without us even realizing. It's the Matrix. Again, we're all getting sucked into this vortex where we can't think for ourselves anymore because we're too stupid, didn't you know? But let me answer these two questions, all right? What happened to Amber? Why, she abused her husband, Johnny Depp, and then lied about being the victim. Who was responsible? Easy. Amber Heard. See? You didn't have to listen to this podcast. I've just saved you millions, if not billions of brain cells and countless precious hours. You're welcome. I hate to break it to you people, but if you're going to come out of your echo chambers and hurl the misogyny arguments at us, you're gonna be met with responses of misandry, okay? Tit for tat.
From their supporters' perspectives, the victimhood is the other way round, and it is men like Depp and Baldoni who are being persecuted.
Hold up, let me check this guy's picture. Was he born in 2022? Does he look like a 3-year-old to you? Or did he conveniently forget that at least from 2016 onwards until the trial, almost the entire world believed Amber Heard? She became one of the faces of Me Too, for crying out loud. And do you know what was happening to Johnny Depp during that time? He was getting persecuted. Yeah, Johnny Depp lost almost everything as a result of Amber's false, defamatory accusations. He lost at least 2 major movie roles. He's pretty much had to leave Hollywood and film in Europe because the entire industry had practically shut its doors in his face over these allegations. His children's lives were deeply impacted because of these allegations. Need I go on? And that's without all the abuse that he had to endure at the hands of Amber Heard. So yeah, it was the other way around. Johnny Depp was Amber Heard's victim in many circumstances and instances during that relationship. To deny that would be to deny the truth. We all heard the recordings, we saw the photos, we heard the witness testimony. But I'm starting to think that Steve didn't. I doubt he even tuned into the trial. He likely relied on tabloid headlines to get his news, because that's what he does in this article. He literally links to tabloid headlines like Us Weekly to reference things from the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case, instead of actually reading court documents and being informed himself and potentially even linking to these court documents. Other publications do it all the time. I mean, what's it gonna take for these people to accept that sometimes women do bad things? And yes, to men too. Is getting someone's finger chopped off not enough? Or is putting out a cigarette on their cheek after that not enough? And we're all gonna forget that this woman, who Steve is earnestly trying to convince us is a victim of misogyny, then went on to paint bruises on her face and fake abuse allegations to get a restraining order and destroy her ex-husband's life. Like that never happened. I don't know what's worse. Are we pretending it never happened, or it did, but it doesn't matter because she's a woman and she can get away with anything? Now, when it comes to Justin Baldoni, look, it's still early days in the sense that the case hasn't gone to trial yet. But before he filed his case earlier this year, I recall a significant amount of discourse on the internet, at least, was pro Blake Lively. And you know what that tells me? A lot of people's instincts still tend to be believe the woman. That is, until evidence to the contrary surfaces. Because just like with Amber Heard, that's when the tide turned with Blake Lively. That's when people started to question her credibility. It wasn't some smear campaign that suddenly materialized out of nowhere, compelling people to abandon their morals, their ethics, their values, and turn into misogynistic monsters virtually overnight. Don't insult your readers and the broader public, Steve. Have some respect. He ends the article by pivoting back to politics because he appeared to have hit a wall yet again. You know, these arguments never make sense. You kind of go, oh, I guess I'll go back to where I started.
This is a right-wing multimedia campaign that is about painting women as inherently lying and manipulative, says Bannettweiser. That's why people say, Me Too has gone too far. That's what Andrew Tate says. That's what radicalized young men say. That women are trying to manipulate them. They're liars. They make false accusations. Their whole goal is to ruin men. That is the broader cultural context in which this case and the media attention to this case starts to make sense.
Yeah, lump all of us who actually use our brains and arrive at logical conclusions with extremists like Andrew Tate to prove your point. Sound tactic. Because everyone knows we're all radicalized woman haters simply because we don't automatically and unconditionally believe all women. It couldn't possibly be that most people don't like lies and they want to side with the truth. Nah, that's too simple. That's too straightforward. And speaking of the truth, here's the thing about the truth. It's not always nice to hear. Sometimes it's inconvenient. And in this case, here's the inconvenient truth. All humans lie. All humans are capable of manipulation. Some humans are capable of despicable acts. But it takes a special kind of sick human to not only commit such despicable acts themselves, but then to flip the story, flip the narrative, and make false accusations against their victim or even some other innocent person who's not necessarily their victim and ruin their lives. Amber Heard is one such human. So is Meghan Markle, by the way, which, yes, I understand Steve did not mention in his article, but come on, it's my channel. She deserves an honorary mention. Jury's still out on Blake, but from what little evidence we've seen, it's not looking too good for her either. And while at this point we still cannot say with certainty who is lying and who is not in the Justin and Blake Lively case, one thing we can be certain of is this. If this case goes to court and Blake Lively loses, you can rest assured that Steve will pen yet another article like this one, absolving Blake entirely, vilifying Justin Baldoni, and calling us all out for the terrible, radical misogynists that he thinks we are. The inconvenient truth be damned. It really makes one wonder where these people's morals lie. And had they or someone they love been in Johnny Depp or Justin Baldoni's shoes, would their articles read any different? I'll leave you to ponder on that. And don't forget to let me know in the comment section. See you later.